Yes, we are live now, folks. So, hey, folks, this is me, Vishwas Nayan. I'm the host of this DevOps chat series. A lot of times I've realized one thing. You know what? I think the way you look cloud in terms of security is going to change and it's going to impact a lot in the real time production. And guess what? There is an everyday problem statement that comes up that's still going to be an Tutawa Fatawa code, which is pushed to the production, or else something like a cloud misconfiguration, which was staying in a longer time and hit you one day as a 0 day. And I think there is a lot of learning that goes behind when you talk cloud in production as well as many other learning as well. So I think Savik Roy sir is one of those people that you have to look back at in the industry and say, you know what, a simple partial script, a simple bash script can also do a lot of work in your entire production. So I think Samik sir is going to give a lot of insights for you on cloud security practices and a lot. So you can ask your questions. Stay tuned for that, and let's get it started. So hey sir, thank you so much for being on the show. It means a lot.
Thanks for inviting, Bishwas. Yeah, thanks. Really loved that you have picked a topic on cloud security, and I'm happy to share my thoughts on that.
Sure. Let's get this
So,
question on:
yep,
is cloud secure? Is cloud really secure in terms of whatever we are thinking about?
that's a great
So
question.
should
Of
they really
course.
fear adoption?
Okay, so that's really a good one and a curious one as well. Now, just to explain, right, what cloud is. Cloud comes in various fashion, where we talk about SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS, right? And SaaS are products, and then they have their own security features built in so that you don't get to do much. But wherever it's come into platform as a service and infrastructure as a service, right? That's where we get into a cloud vendor like Microsoft, AWS, GCP, and the way cloud is designed, it's more of an open shelf, right? It depends, or it's like a open room. So well, whichever vendor, I'll just take a reference of Microsoft. If you go for Microsoft Cloud, they give you a subscription, they get under an enterprise agreement, and as such, and that's a free playground. Now it totally depends on how you armor that around to make your inner infrastructure free. For example, if you take hub and spoke as architecture in cloud, right? So we do all the baselining or basic things or primary things in hub, and there are spoke networks and the network is spread across both. So it totally depends on our understanding on cloud, that what we want to do with the cloud, and then what kind of application we want to build. So that will tell us what are the security pillars we should be building. But having said that, there are certain products Microsoft is, even cloud vendors are evolving. For example, there is something like Defender, so they defend. So if you talk about a product called Defender for cloud apps, so any app service, any application, right? For example, you have an ARM template, or you have a web app, right? Or you have a virtual machine. So basically, or you have a SQL server even. So you can defend by the protection of Microsoft. So that's a service they provide even, and that's kind of protects you 24 bar 7. And the benefit is like, Microsoft does it for all the customers. So let's say there are hundreds and thousands of customers, and everybody try to adopt it, and the learning Microsoft gets from all together, and that's like, collected and circulated back again. So it's like more secure than like one environment you have. So that's kind of a mechanism. And to refer it back again, it totally depends on how you want to configure it, right? That's the outer perimeter. And obviously there are firewall securities, there are like, NSGs and things like that, which helps you to build and define the cloud architecture. So that was on the infrastructure side. Now there is always, and the most strong as well as vulnerable part is the identity piece, right? So with Azure AD, you really get stronger. For example, MFA, and recently there was a release saying that with MFA, right? MFA calls means multi-factor authentication, wherein you are not dependent on one device. Even you can configure a FIDO key, that's a hardware token, right? So that definitely signifies that it's physically you. Then it will let you log in. So that's a part of security. But having said that, it's all left to the configuration of the organization or of the person who is managing the tenant, right? So if you configure it, you're secure. If you don't configure it, you're not secure. And that comes into two cases. One, the way the organizations laid out the policies, the kind of accounts they have. For example, there are organizations who are having accounts, there might not be, you cannot do MFA, so there are service to service calls, right? So you cannot do MFA to block them. So there are different mechanism you can actually make sure that they are logging in from a defined location. So there is something called access policy or conditional access policy. So for example, if I'm in India, right, so I should not be allowed to log in from anywhere else. It will lock me down. So if my credential is compromised, for example, and you are in US and you try to log in for that, and that doesn't work. So I'd say again, cloud, the question is not about, cloud is secure or not. The question is how secure you can make the cloud to work for you. Yeah.
So, there is a lot of things that goes behind when you want to scan the cloud resources for vulnerabilities. There is a
Right.
new dimension of code that comes in. Like it's something like, is your Terraform really secure? Is your
Okay.
ARM templates really secure? And there's a lot of things coming up today. So, what makes
Great.
it secure when we think of the adoption as one of the criterias, but how to really secure the resources in the cloud, because there is a new way in which everybody is thinking about policy governance. I think intent as code is one of them. Terraform is also based on that. So I just want to ask you the
Right.
question on what makes it secure and how to secure the resources on the cloud.
So talk about planning an enterprise scale architecture for cloud, right? First thing I'd recommend, and what I do for customer is like, we just create a free playground and do the basic blocks building around that. For example, as I took a reference of hub and spoke, or any other architecture model you want to define. So what's going to be the firewall rule, what's going to be the IP address allowed, what's going to be the subnet, and things like that. So your fundamental playground is secure. Now when you do migration, all right, so now there are multiple ways you can do a lift and shift, you can rebuild, right? So when you do all those things, and then let's say you have a virtual machine running, or you have a SQL server running, Defender and products like that can take care of what is ongoing, and when you're migrating, anything new comes up, that's going to get picked up. And third point is, once you have something in cloud, how do you kind of keep pushing next things, new features to cloud? That's where the DevOps piece comes into picture, right? Either it's infrastructure as a code or normal, application code, either it's Terraform, it's ARM template, whatever you call it, right? So with Microsoft acquiring GitHub, they also have new capabilities around code scanning. So let's say either you're building a containerized app, or you are basically deploying your infrastructure with your Terraform template, right? So in that case, maybe you have hard coded any of the credentials in the Terraform template, which is not a good practice. So before even it goes to cloud, right, there is a scanning mechanism of DevOps, which let you write your own logic to kind of filter what should be there, what should not be there. That's like a policy in DevOps. That's one thing, right? Apart from that, there is also a code scanning feature which basically scans with the latest CVs available. So if it finds something, let's say you are doing a container app, and that's using a specific version which with a specific CV, that's going to pick it up and then highlight you, okay, hold on to the deployment, you have this, if you're okay to go, that's your risk. That's one thing, right? And there's another part to it. Whenever we are pushing things to cloud, or when I'm moving things to cloud, right? So just to make sure that the infrastructure or the services running in cloud, right, are secure. So there are products, even there are Defender, there are code scanners where you can set a scanner in cloud itself to scan all your cloud machines or cloud VMs, and that basically scans with the latest CVs we have. And the the approach is pretty similar. Microsoft does it for all the customers. So if there's a 0-day, right, that's going to get reflected and caught in all the environment. So we don't need to put any additional effort. So that's how it makes it like a real-time protection. So again, it depends on how you configure it and how you upgrade it. Even recently, in the last Ignite, I think Microsoft has released something like Defender for DevOps. So yeah, that means in your DevOps environment also, you should be able to leverage the feature of real-time protection. So any of the DevOps in the world who's using the product, they have some vulnerability. You can actually get that benefit in your code repo as well. Yeah.
Sure,
So
there is a lot. I think there is a bounty program which there is coming up where there is an. I think
yes,
there is always a fear of about this cloud vendor who will obviously be there, but it's still in our hands and we can still control it. And we have signed an SLA for that as well. So, scanning cloud resources for vulnerabilities is good, but what is seen doing in the entire production environment, and how does it come to play in the real time production? Because a lot of times there is RAS, runtime application security patchings,
yeah,
and this and that, SAS, DAS, IaaS, whatnot. So how does SIEM come into the play in the vulnerability scanning and also keeping this cloud infrastructure more secure?
right. So as I mentioned, right, there are different aspects, and just to add to the bug bounty program, that's also another initiative. Even if the products, the cloud vendors are leveraging, if that's not enough, someone can get something out of that. The cloud vendors are happy to accept and adopt and evolve about that. Now coming back to, there are product silos, like there are vulnerability scanners from virtual machines, there are scanners from SQL servers. So and there are scanners for, let's say, your email. That's again a SaaS product, right? That's a SaaS product. Anybody can spam you with email. So there are products which basically stops and scans. So fundamentally, if we look at, there are products which, let's say, someone is sending an email, right, outside the organization to you with an attachment. What it does, it before even it reaches your mailbox, right? It the product takes the copy of the email and then deploys into a sandbox environment and detonates all the URL and the attachment in there, and does a scanning to make sure that the entire mail is bulletproof, and then it kind of delivers in your mailbox. So all these things are already there standalone, but again, because of the nature of the cloud and the diversity of the customer base, right, the product range is really huge and going up and up and up. So if you talk about firewall, you can go to Palo Alto, or if you can use Zscaler at times for your proxies and things like that. There should be a common ground we call SIEM environment. We call it SIEM security terms, and the concepts really there long back in on premises. But the catch was, like, in on premises, you have to collect all the telemetry, you have to manage a data center, you have to manage your own data store, right? Take all the data, scan it, index it, and then you can kind of figure out something is wrong or not, right? So that's going to be dependent heavily on the customer's infrastructure. And then without infrastructure, it doesn't work, right? So now with that, there's a cloud SIEM. Even Google has something like Chronicle. Microsoft has Sentinel, right? In that case, what happens is that's like a single pane of a glass wherein they have a data store called log analytics behind the scene, which collects all of your data, like either it's Office mailbox data, it's SharePoint data, it's Exchange data, or if it is like Active Directory. So somebody is trying to log into your Active Directory, or your identity management data. And even third party, like you have, let's say, containerized application across the organization which runs on your Linux machine. So you want to collect the Linux telemetry, right? So that comes under syslog. So all those can be collected and pushed. Even Kubernetes also have a verbose level of logging based on the configuration you do, right? All those logging can be brought into a single place. And there are two unique benefits to it. One, you get everything in one place, so you get much confidence. And whenever you have more data in one place, and they become more relevant. For example, if I'm using an application, right, and that application is raising an alert that Summix login is failure, and again my machine telemetry is collected, and as someone there is an alert created that there are like 500 file downloads in Summix machine. So if you have two different data sets and two different softwares, or products to monitor them, it is very difficult to figure out two are same event. But when you bring them together, right, you can see things happen in parallel, and that gives you more confidence, kind of to correlate the alert and make a stronger decision, right? That this is the same thread, and that also helps you for the understanding of where the attacker is in the kill chain. It's like initial, lateral move. Basically, lateral is what we capture more because people want to move across a place without leaving a trace. So with the same concept, and the thing I'd say is like, seam doesn't run on your production, it basically runs for your production, basically, because you collect all the data, and then you kind of build, and all those things are detected within a single pane of glass, and it's scalable because it's cloud. Now, detection is not everything, right? You have to detect, you have to hunt, you have to do forensics, and then what about if something goes wrong? You find there's a threat, how do you do it? So there are products, and even in seam, with the SOAR capabilities, right, the orchestration capabilities and remediation capabilities, you can basically, let's say there's a threat from machine, so you can start a real-time scan on the machine right away the moment the alert comes in. Even if it is too much, right, if there is a ransomware attack, and there's a lateral moment you are expecting, you can go ahead and isolate the machine. And let's say you are working on an environment where there are 5 in a cluster. So but it's morning time, it's okay to isolate one server. There's no much of impact, and then you do your offline analysis, bring it back. So yeah, that was kind of a holistic view how what Seam offers.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to know, like, Azure Sentinel has been a huge impact. It's not just red team, blue teams, or any teams which are using it, but every security professional somehow who is using Azure is obviously attached to the Sentinel somewhere down the line in terms of his security practices.
Right.
What's the impact that a
Right.
Sentinel can bring on table?
So let's say first thing, right? We talk about the product. The thing, like, straight away talking from the cost perspective, everybody is little worried that whenever talk about the term security, it's going to be costly. So Microsoft has broken the myth. First thing is, whenever you're using Sentinel as a product, first 31 days till 10 gigs of ingestion, you get all free. So really gives you a lot of flexibility to understand the product and understand the capabilities. And then basically, if you're planning, right, there's a very well documented process, right, where you can figure out, let's say if I'm ingesting 10 gigs a day today, and then I have 50 servers, and then in 50 servers I'm ingesting 2 gigs a day from each server. So my per day ingestion will be 100 GB or 200 GB. How much cost I'm going to get over the year? So the good part is, because it's a SaaS, sorry, it's a cloud, it's available as a cloud SIEM, right? So you can predict the cost beforehand, and that gives you context. That's one thing. And again, the good part is you only pay for what you ingest. You don't need to pay for how much ever query you do, and whatever remediation you run, that's like very very cheaper. For example, it just maybe day to create an automation to isolate a machine from, or maybe reset the password of a user automatically just in minutes. It's a 1 day effort, and then you can see that that will solve, or that will save you 200 tickets over the year. And it costs like almost negligible. So with Sentinel, the good part is you get to the data, and there are I have not come across any data source yet which cannot be ingested in Sentinel. So that's like, it's a blanket statement. There are connectors, and then people are building connector day by day, and then the connector count is increasing. And that's one thing on the data ingestion side. And then once you have the data, you can really process and then analyze it. And there are features like workbook, which is full of visual, like, you can, so the language called is Custo Query Language, KQL, right? So you can literally, there are more than 100 workbook out of the box across the products, and you can literally write anything, to build up a good visual. So once you have the data, right, it also gives you a very granular visibility of the data, what's right, what's wrong, alongside the data ingestion. So that was, I would say, the impact, right? When you have more knowledge, it's easier to predict, and it easier to find the faults on. And on top of all this, right, when you have this data, so basically it works on MITRE. So there are products, as I said, we call it E5 as a stack: Defender for Office, Defender for Endpoint. So there's a capability you can bring all the alert to one single piece, that is SIEM. You can also get in raw logs, where you have the privilege to write your own load, right? And when you write your own rule, there are techniques and tactics from MITRE available. You can tag them, and when you do so, over the time, the machine learning model runs behind Sentinel, right? It accumulates all the signal, and as I was talking about the lateral movement, right, the Sentinel tool itself basically picks up for you. You don't need to work on picking up and correlation, things like that. So over time it gets matured. So yeah, that's the impact, I'd say.
Sure. Let's come about how to quickly respond and remediate, because MTTR is something that we always look back at. One of the Dora matrices that we always have, right? Mean time to recovery and mean time to acknowledge is
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that we are thinking about today. I think probably
Right.
SLI and SLOs is, I think, rethought today in terms of the DevOps, because SLAs were always thought about like, this is going to be the impact that we are going to have, but it's a lot of impact that has just been bought with respect to those matrices on the culture. So now let's talk
Okay.
about how to quickly remediate and respond, because a lot of times things change within a fraction of seconds. If we don't remediate quicker, probably it's going to be a 0 day for a longer run. So how is the remediation and the response is going to be different with respect to the cloud, and how is this adoption going to take place, because a lot of security loopholes in architecture, things are moving very fast.
Right. So, as you rightly pointed out, there is a way to remediate, obviously. So, if you talk about technically, you can, as I said, you can reset a password in minutes, even less than a minute, right? But the question is, ways. So there are two models, as of today, running in the market. One, there are big organizations who manage their own SOC team or security team, wherein the incident response is done in-house, and the other one is you basically outsource. So there are service providers who take your environment and then they monitor on behalf of you and they respond. And in that case, that becomes a shared responsibility model, right? So technically the remediation almost takes some time, right? So for example, in this case, it can take 5 minutes maybe max. But it depends on how whose accounts you are disabling. Is it a salesperson? That might impact, right? So that that's a process, and that's a framework we should be building out in cybersecurity. So we call PPT, people process and technology framework, right? So when people do the right process, then the technology works at its best. So yeah, technically setting up a seam is less than half an hour, I would say. But the process will definitely take 2 to 6 months, depending on the size of the company, because you have to do the baselining. You have to understand how many assets you have, which are high value assets, which are low value assets, right? And how many assets are basically okay to isolate, how many are production asset, you cannot touch them, though there is zero vulnerability, right? So the impact is really really heavy. You have the button on your disposal, but you cannot click it just because it is vulnerable. But so those kind of factors work more. So process and people matters more here in terms of adoption. And that's where in today's world we see a lot of community events on an education standpoint, right? Wherein we bring in not only the CISOs, the security managers, the L1, L1 SOC tier, L1 members, L2 members, L3 members, to understand what's their responsibility is. So it's like not technically how fast you can respond. It's like, okay, so there is an incident on user A. So you should be proactive enough to call him up and then say, was that you or not you? Based on the response, that part, right? That part of human interaction cannot be automated, and that's always there in security. So I'd say, technically it's a full go on, and then the maturity time it's taken based on the size of the organization and the size of the team and team maturity. So you have to have the right people, and then and there should be a continuous evaluation and continuous learning, because the API or the things whatever is working today, right? For example, if we talk about a year back, right? So let's say there is a brute force attack. So was to disable the account, right? But again, as of today, if we rethink the same scenario, right, the way may be little different. We can make a conditional access to make sure that if a brute force happens to my account, I should be only put into a condition that I am allowed to log in from India, not from anywhere else. That also isolates the threat, right? There is no issue with stop going forward. So in that way, if you look at the new method, right, you see the improvement. It is not hampering my productivity or hampering me any way to work. The person, the threat actor who tried to steal my credential, he is not able to access. And then it can give me SLA of 1 day or 2 day to reset my password myself. So that's the evolution has to happen, in adoption. And that's what I would say. Technology will definitely give you chances, but you have to understand and decide intelligently what is the right thing to do at the right point.
Sure. I think somewhere down the line, we talk about security in a different way, but there is something called a security posture that is getting defined. Cloud native security
Yeah,
posture, Kubernetes
yeah,
security posture, cyber security, cloud security posture, CSPM,
yeah.
KSPM, what's not. I think the fact that OWASP came out with OWASP top 10 Kubernetes has really made me shocked and think that we need to rethink Kubernetes adoption again, because OWASP has seen the
Yeah.
common vulnerability pattern which can still exist in
That's
any production system. I think it's rigged out to be the best. It still has that. So how do you have to
yes.
rethink about the security posture today in terms of the adoption at scale?
So again, when you say adoption at scale in the field, I would say that's a buzzword because if you talk about adoption, it has to take its own sweet time. Because if you try to do adoption and scale, right, it's not that you deploy, you create multiple users. It's like it's a change of a behavior. So the good part about today's technology is if something happens in US and UK, there is a threat found, right? My org can in India can definitely leverage that as a threat and then try to mitigate it. That's a good part, like that's at our disposal. Second thing, as I give a same example, or if you take about OASP, latest releases. So what happens is there are, I know there are applications which are 10 years 20 years old, and then you cannot get rid of them for certain reasons. So rethinking is like, we start with same. It's a basically somehow comparable to a migration process, right? You migrate from your old security posture to a new security posture. So again, if you look at tool, there are a lot of tools which not only tell you your security posture is 10 right now, to go to 20 you have to do this. For example, you have to enable MFA, you have to put conditional access policy, and five more things, right? It doesn't stop there. It also tells you based on your users behavior, right, which is the first one to pick up. So that's kind of a taking the easy piece out. It is just the other way of taking the elephant out approach. So you have to have the easy piece out first to make sure your score goes up, and then you impact the users, at a lesser point of time. So yeah, see, having MFA 20 times it's not a problem, but if you ask me to reset the MFA once in a month, that's like a pain, because I have to take my mobile. It's like a tedious process. But so you have to like, align, or the organization have to align themselves closer to the human behavior change. So the feature you can implement best is when it takes the lesser amount of user behavior change, that has more time. For example, if you talk about, I'm pressing a yes button in the mobile to do my MFA. So just the yes and no button will flip from tomorrow. That's not going to impact, but technically how to implement it, that's more of a thing to think about. Yeah.
I think yes. Last point about this entire conversation about me is thinking about what is infrastructure as code and how can it impact the security aspect in terms of Terraform as well as container scanning, because a lot of times it's just something that we set as low, and if there is a lowest uh, score of that vulnerability, I think probably that's going to impact us in a different way. Like probably somebody knows that okay, they are still using NGINX and this is the version of it, and it has the same vulnerability. I can hit them with this kind of a
Yeah, yeah.
vulnerability,
And
and I think that's a really a
nobody want
tedious
to
start.
upgrade their Python version.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
nobody want to
true.
upgrade their Python version. Everybody is scared what will break, right? So
Yeah.
basically,
So
in that aspect, yeah.
So I want to ask you this one question: like, how is DevOps going to impact in a different fashion? Because everything is automated and everything is put in a form of a code. So how is this going to impact the way which we are going to think about the production issues?
Okay, so right now, if you talk about DevOps is good for infrastructure. But if you talk about Kubernetes, things at scale, right? There's something also as a concept called GitOps, right? So what happens is, again, just because it's GitOps, we should not be going and using it. It depends. So we can, so sometimes slowing down things is also helpful. So for example, there are 50 people, let's take Walmart as an example. There'll be like 100 developers will be working on their containerized application, and they'll be working across the globe. So it's practically not possible that every developer checks in, you do a new build and push it to production, and that's not safe as well, right? So in that case, one approach could be just delay out in a way that once in a day you scan everything, right? And once you scan it, you found a vulnerability, send a mail to the whole team who has done the check-in for last 1 day, or whoever is working, and let everybody figure out. It's not only, see, writing a vulnerability is not only one person's fault or one person's responsibility. It's a team's responsibility, because if I'm writing a code wherever I have a CVE found, it's maybe because my functionality, or it's maybe because of some dependent functionality I'm writing on. Because the code is written that way, I'm writing the other way. So it should be a team effort. It's not that we have been thinking it just in a linear way, that this guy has written the code, coded the vulnerability, he's the culprit, just get hold of it. But that's not the case, right? So if you have to do upgrade, let's say talk about Python, upgrade, right? So the whole team has to understand that what's the impact in our code. It's not that we forget that we don't have any impact, so we can wash up our hands. That's not like that. So again, it boils down to, from a DevOps, when you talk about DevOps, it's more of an involvement from the entire team, right? So and whoever is setting up, right, they have to be very compliant in the policy, and then they have to be very clear whenever they're upgrading the pipeline, or wherever they're changing any new conditions in the pipeline, right? So just because, let's say, if a build pipeline is running with two approvals, one fine day you cannot make it four. That doesn't work if the team itself is having four team members, that goes and crashes, right? So the communication is important here, and obviously technology will help, because there are advanced GitHub actions, DevOps actions, where you can actually pull in the code and then help your code scanning, right? So just yesterday I was troubleshooting, a Kubernetes thing, wherever, or I'd say Docker container, right? So deployed in Azure, right? And then it was starting and it was stopping, it was starting and stopping. So finally we figured out, we mentioned a thing that was a long running job where we have to pass a parameter as an attribute, right, to make sure that it stays alive to that time, and then the application gets hosted, and finally it fixed it. So it was not me who fixed it, it was not my counterpart who fixed it's like the whole team, we figured out as a team that this is what the image is, and the image has 50 dependencies. So out of 50 dependencies, because it is 50, it has a longer runtime. So that's where the example comes in, right? So yeah.
Sure, I think thank you so much, sir, for such great insights. I think somewhere down the line, I think we do not just figure out what just has to happen. I think we have to strategize what is the chaos strategy that we have today. I think somewhere I feel that if you don't strategize chaos properly, somewhere down the line, you're missing out on the features that is required. You're missing out on a lot of
Yeah.
things that is just going to happen one fine day, and you have to be ready for
Yeah.
it. I think that's the mindset that we need to follow. And thank you so much for such great insights. You shared a lot regarding IAC, you shared a lot regarding many application software as well. So same is one of those, rasp, IAC, whatever it is, it's still going to be a software at the end of the day. So thank you so much, sir. So let's meet soon. Let's meet, I think, December 2nd,
Sure.
December 3rd. We have a meetup on
Yeah.
Bangalore. So let's just meet there and just learn something new.
Sure. Sure.
Sure, let's just end
Thank
the
you for hosting me.
broadcast now. Yes, sir, sure.